I'm beginning a new series of audio-visual narrated essays for those who prefer to listen rather than read. In this first installment, I explore the deeper meaning and larger context of the time of transition we are currently living through. The end of an age, the forces shaping this period, the possibility of a new humanity emerging through it, the challenges we face, and the task before us. You can also find the link to the full written article below. The time of transition, the end of an age and the birth of a new humanity. An esoteric exploration of humanity's evolutionary threshold. This is a long-form piece that weaves together several esoteric traditions and frameworks, including the esoteric Christian teaching of the time of transition, the Yuga cycle, Ekpyrosis, and Sri Aurobindo's revelation of the descent of the Supramental consciousness. Through these lenses, I want to explore the evolutionary threshold humanity is standing at and what is being asked of us at this critical moment. The collective dark night of the soul. We're in the midst of the death of an old era and the birth of a new one. We can see the writing on the wall everywhere: increasing polarization, wars, economic instability, and the old world disintegrating before our eyes. But on a deeper level, what we are witnessing is not only political, economic, or social breakdown. It is also a crisis of meaning and, at its root, a spiritual crisis. The dominant worldview of our time is pure materialism, stripped of spiritual depth. Our connection to the sacred has been severed. The result is emptiness and despair in many people. Most are dissociated, numbed out, or in denial about what is happening. These are defense mechanisms. Many are also traumatized without realizing it. As a result, depression, mental illness, suicide, and addiction have risen sharply in much of the modern world as more and more people feel disconnected from God, from purpose, and from any higher meaning in life. In many ways, it is as if humanity is going through a collective dark night of the soul, a deep disconnection from the divine and from the deeper meaning of existence. Instead of confronting this crisis within themselves, many people regress into old and empty religious forms and dogma, blame politicians and leaders, or project everything onto some outer enemy or cabal they believe to be responsible for it all. But these reactions only avoid the deeper issue. They keep attention fixed on outer effects while ignoring the inner roots of the crisis. Mistaking symptoms for causes, hardly anyone looks sincerely within. Yet, none of this is happening by accident or because of bad politics. It carries a deeper meaning and purpose. What we are facing is the exposure of a humanity trapped in identification with the ego personality and the material world, cut off from the divine. But this time is also a threshold to cross. In other words, the chaos and drama we see around us reveal something deeper. It is not about trying to save the world. The old world is dying because it can no longer withstand the evolutionary pressure now acting upon humanity. Something deeper is seeking to be born through this disintegration and seeming chaos. What happens next is of critical importance because it will become the seed of the next cycle of life on Earth. Therefore, we must understand what being in a transitionary period really means and how it affects us individually and collectively. What is the time of transition? People have often asked me what I mean by this time of transition. I've seen more and more people use this phrase to describe these evolutionary times, and everyone has their own ideas about it. I first learned about the time of transition in 2006 when I studied esoteric Christianity and the fourth way teachings of Boris Muraviev in his Gnosis trilogy. Longtime readers of my work know that I've quoted from these books extensively in the articles and essays I've written over the years. Muraviev writes about the time of transition in Gnosis, describing the shift of the ages. According to the esoteric Christian tradition, not to be confused with mainstream dogmatic Christianity, human evolution after a long prehistoric period continues in a succession of 3 cycles: the cycle of the Father, the cycle of the Son, which is now reaching its end, and finally the cycle of the Holy Spirit, which we are now approaching. The time of transition we are currently in is the transitionary period between the cycle of the Son and the cycle of the Holy Spirit. It is a critical stage in humanity's esoteric and spiritual evolution. According to Muraviev, a successful transition is not guaranteed. It is an opportunity, but not a guarantee. It depends on a certain fraction of humanity, those with soul potential, consciously engaging in the great work to become individuated and spiritualized. Through this inner work and purification, they anchor the divine force, the Holy Spirit, and help transmute the world, getting it out of the clutches of the hostile anti-divine forces. A failure of this evolutionary process would result in cataclysmic destruction similar to what befell ancient civilizations in previous cycles, such as Atlantis, and is symbolized in the biblical flood. The destruction would result from humanity not learning its lessons and the necessity of repeating the cycle. In other words, the divine pressing the reset button. Muraviev describes this transition as a period of immense danger, responsibility, but also possibility. His warning is worth quoting at length because it captures both the stakes of this moment and the deeper meaning of the crisis we are living through. In the following parts of this article, I will return to key aspects of his warning and connect them to other traditions, teachers, and cosmological frameworks, such as the Yuga cycle, Sri Aurobindo's teaching on the descent of the supramental consciousness, the idea that the human being is itself a transitional being, the necessity of a spiritualized humanity, and the deeper meaning of the purification process. Muraviev writes in Gnosis, quote, "We have entered a period of transition whose purpose is to give us entry to the cycle of the Holy Spirit. During this period, faith will be progressively replaced by knowledge, and hope will end in accomplishment. The transition from one state to another is not effected without conscious efforts, hard work, and a struggle. For the one who today decides to engage himself on the path leading to the way should in principle become another spiritualized man. In case of failure, we cannot hope that the world will return to the status quo ante. The era of the Holy Spirit has two phases, one of paradise regained and the other of a deluge of fire. We must not forget that God is also a devouring fire. In case of failure, the situation will rapidly lead to an eschatological cataclysm. This requires courage and humility. With the approach of the era of the Holy Spirit, everything must be gradually brought to the light of day, not only the secrets of the laboratory, but the deepest meanings of esotericism. The same must happen with illusions, errors, and lies, which must also be revealed so they can later be rectified. This process is already happening. It is this which to a large extent explains the political and social difficulties which characterize our time of transition. Yet only a few people know how to interpret the signs of our times. The world is suffering from a lack of harmony which gets deeper on every plane, and this is a serious danger to the moral and spiritual recovery of humanity. It also involves a serious risk of failure in the last stage of this time of transition that we are now entering. If this risk is not overcome, the deluge of fire awaits us. We will have to make an immense effort to ward off this fate, and we have very little time to which to do it. Man has only himself to blame for the greatness of the effort needed. This is a result of his obstinate refusal to heed the warnings that have been addressed to him time and again by the divine voice. Just as he continues today to blind himself to the fact that the deluge of fire is being made ready, that it is now technically feasible and, it must be said, morally possible. This final cataclysm towards which humanity is advancing so blindly can only be avoided by the conscious super efforts of the spiritual elite, especially by young and enthusiastic elements of the present generation and those which follow it, whose esoteric predispositions will make them fit to assume key positions in all races and in all nations. Neither the most marvelous technological progress nor a greater refinement of the intellectual faculties will be enough to enable us to remedy this state of affairs, which is still deteriorating. The remainder of the time of transition offers the last chance for humanity to re-establish the threatened equilibrium and so avoid a general cataclysm. Before the Earth can enter the era of the Holy Spirit, the time of transition must reach a successful outcome, and this outcome will in turn depend on a positive answer to a whole group of problems which will be solved by the appearance of the new spiritualized man. Muraviev's warning is sobering, but it also points to a much larger cyclical and evolutionary process that has been described in different ways across esoteric traditions from the East and the West. This time of transition is not a short period confined to our current lifetime. It will last hundreds, possibly even thousands of years. There is no need then to fixate on specific dates or predictions. What you see beyond appearances through higher knowledge or gnosis, and what you do in alignment with divine will in the now, helps shape the future timeline both individually, in this life, and future incarnations, and collectively. Time is not linear, but cyclical. It has all happened many times before, over and over again. But perhaps we can avoid the fate of Atlantis and other ancient civilizations of the past, when the divine pressed the reset button through cataclysmic events brought on by humanity's ignorance and refusal to heed the voice of the divine. This is what I've called the Great Reset, not in the sense of a human cabal enslaving humanity, which many people get distracted by, but as a divine or cosmic reset versus the Great Awakening, which is not merely an informational awareness of conspiracies and psyops, but a deeper awakening to one's true nature. The Great Year and the Yuga Cycle. There's an ancient map of time and consciousness that offers even more context and helps confirm Muravyev's insight into the time of transition we are currently in. This map helps us understand why the world is the way it is, and what is now being asked of us as humanity moves into the next cycle. The ancients called it the Great Year, a 25,800-year cycle aligned with the precession of the equinoxes, consisting of a roughly 13,000-year descent and a 13,000-year ascent. It is also known as the Yuga cycle, and we are now at the end of its darkest age, the Kali Yuga. Many ancient cultures saw this cycle as the great cosmic clock. This knowledge gives us a bigger picture view of what is happening because we are entering an intensified transitional phase that occurs between the yugas. This is a period marked by societal upheaval, increasing polarization, war, and cataclysmic natural events, just as many ancient civilizations before us have experienced. These cosmic forces are part of a much larger evolutionary process. Common misconceptions about the Yuga cycle. There are many popular misconceptions about the Yuga cycle, including the idea that we are already in the Dwapara Yuga or that the Kali Yuga lasts 432,000 years. We addressed some of these distortions in our podcast, Is the Kali Yuga Ending in 2025? The Great Turning, and what it asks of us, based on the book Yuga Shift, The End of the Kali Yuga and the Impending Planetary Transformation by Bibhu Dev Misra. Bibhu was also recently a guest on our podcast, where we explored these themes in more depth in the episode titled The Yuga Shift and the Planetary Transition Ahead with Bibhu Dev Misra. In my opinion, Misra cuts through much of the noise and presents a clear and coherent case for why the Kali Yuga ended around 2025 and why we're now entering an intense transitional phase. By removing chronological errors, symbolic exaggerations, and cultural distortions that have built up over thousands of years, he reconstructs the original Yuga doctrine in a way that is both cross-cultural and grounded in actual data, while remaining consistent with other ancient cosmologies and world cycle teachings. The descent from the Golden Age. The Yuga cycle moves downward from the Golden Age through the Treta and Dwapara Yuga into the Kali Yuga over 13,000 years. In this process of descent, consciousness gradually degrades and human beings lose their natural unity with the divine, becoming more ego-centered and materially oriented. As consciousness descends, lifespans shorten, intelligence and physical strength weaken, and illness and disease and suffering arise more strongly. It is a long decline in human virtue, wisdom, intelligence, and higher capacities through the ages. It is interesting to note that spiritual rituals, scriptures, and formal spiritual practices only emerged after the end of the Golden Age because human beings had lost their natural connection to the divine. As inner guidance and divine alignment weakened, people began seeking external guidance, and with that came manipulation, distortion, and corruption born of ignorance, spiritual blindness, and the temptation of power. This arc of decline is what many myths describe symbolically as the fall from unity into separation, as reflected in the story of the fall from Eden. By the time we enter the later ages, intuitive spiritual insight fades, materialism grows, and power is increasingly pursued for personal gain based on the illusion of separation. The cycle reaches its lowest point in the Iron Age, the Kali Yuga. This is the age of darkness and moral decline. As consciousness descends further, there is an increasing forgetfulness of our true nature and a loss, corruption, or distortion of ancient knowledge. This is also why it has been so difficult to reconstruct the original Yuga cycle, as Misra points out. As ego consciousness separates further from the divine, it opened itself more and more to darker influences. The rise of evil and hostile forces. This descent opened the door for the rise of evil and the influence of darker forces operating from spiritual realms, feeding on suffering, polarization, fear, desire, greed, lust, hatred, violence, and the fragmentation of the human psyche. Humanity began engaging with dark spirits and entities in manipulative ways, even invoking hostile beings for power. By the time we reach the Kali Yuga, the spiritual senses are almost fully veiled, and hostile occult spiritual forces have the greatest access to humanity through the lower nature. Understanding the characteristics of the Kali Yuga and this descent of consciousness helps explain why evil has such a grip on humanity and why, as Sri Aurobindo pointed out, the forces of darkness often appear stronger and better organized than the forces of light. This is also why sincere spiritual work and the bringing down of the light is not merely a metaphorical battle, but an actual spiritual war acting through us. It is much harder to engage in the inner psycho-spiritual work because we are the farthest removed from essence, and the resistance of our ego structure and the hostile forces is at its peak. That's why this work requires the sincerity, commitment, and courage of a spiritual warrior. This is what Sri Aurobindo called the hour of God. As he wrote, "There are moments when the Spirit moves among men and the breath of the Lord is abroad upon the waters of our being. There are others when it retires and men are left to act in the strength or the weakness of their own egoism. The first are periods when even a little effort produces great results and changes destiny. The second are spaces of time when much labor goes to the making of a little result. It is true that the latter may prepare the former. Maybe the little smoke of sacrifice going up to heaven which calls down the rain of God's bounty. Unhappy is the man or the nation which, when the divine moment arrives, is found sleeping or unprepared to use it, because the lamp has not been kept trimmed for the welcome and the ears are sealed to the call. But thrice woe to them who are strong and ready, yet waste the force and misuse the moment. For them is irreparable loss or a great destruction." The double Kali Yuga. As Misra clearly lays out, we have not been living through one Kali Yuga, but two back-to-back Kali Yugas. A descending phase followed immediately by an ascending phase, totaling roughly 5,700 years. The descending Kali Yuga marked the deepest fall into darkness, when consciousness hit its lowest point and humanity became almost fully cut off from higher spiritual realities. The ascending Kali Yuga marks a slow upward turn in which material progress increases and ancient knowledge begins to re-emerge. Science and technology advance, yet spiritual consciousness remains severely degraded. This is why the modern world displays such extreme technological advancement and unprecedented material comfort, while so many people remain disconnected from the divine and higher spiritual reality. The result is hypermaterialism, mental overstimulation, dissociation, disembodiment, ideological extremes, scientific and religious dogma, and a growing fixation on lower expressions of sex, money, and power. Success is reduced to material wealth and popularity alone. Material progress without spiritual maturity. A vast gap has opened between material and spiritual development. This is one of the clearest signatures of the ascending Kali Yuga, and it should not be mistaken for a true rise in consciousness. Many people claim that humanity has evolved and is now at a higher level of consciousness, but they only look back a few thousand years, still within the Kali Yuga, rather than 13,000 years. They also mistake material progress for a rise in consciousness. Many ancient traditions describe this back-to-back Kali Yuga as a night within the night. It also helps to explain the splitting of humanity we are seeing now. One part of humanity is responding to the inner call, engaging in spiritual work and seeking to align with Dharma in preparation for the next cycle. Another part is becoming further entrapped in the materialist religion of transhumanism and rebellion against divine order. The signs of the Kali Yuga are all around us and can be seen clearly in the modern world. Spiritual disconnection and loss of inner guidance, moral inversion and the normalization of pathologies, hypermaterialism and identification with the body, obsession with physical longevity, youthful appearance and fear of death, hypersexualization and fixation on lower expressions of sex, money and power, rising narcissism and superficiality, loss of attention span, declining intelligence and mechanical thinking, loss of meaning, nihilism, atheism and psychological fragmentation, corruption and distortion of spirituality and religion, polarization, conflict and ideological splitting, rapid technological growth without wisdom or spiritual awareness, rising depression, mental illness and suicide rates, dissociation and disembodiment, declining fertility and nervous system health, breakdown of authentic human relationships and community. According to Misra, we are now at the end of the ascending Kali Yuga around 2025. He explains in detail in his book why this marks the close of the cycle. We are not merely living at the end of an age, but standing at the threshold of a purification transition between world cycles. This is what the ancients referred to as the Ekpyrosis phase. The Ekpyrosis phase of the transition. Sri Aurobindo hinted at this purification when he said, "I cannot promise that the divine's will is to preserve the current civilization. The present civilization must change, but whether by destruction or a new construction on the basis of a greater truth is the issue." Ekpyrosis is a Greek term meaning burning up completely or purification through fire. It describes the transitional phase between world ages, a period of roughly 1,200 years, during which the old world breaks down and the conditions for the next evolutionary stage are seeded. This is not destruction for its own sake. Ekpyrosis signifies the burning away of the accumulated corruption of the Dark Age. It is the collapse of materialistic civilizations cut off from spirit and the divine, the exposure of moral and spiritual decay, and the beginning of the upward movement toward higher consciousness. It is also the decisive crossroads that intensifies the split within humanity, as vastly different levels of being and consciousness determine how people respond to the evolutionary call. In Greek Stoic cosmology, Ekpyrosis was understood as the moment when the world is consumed in fire and then renewed. Misra connects this ancient teaching to actual cosmic cycles, periods of extreme solar activity, increased comet and asteroid danger, major earthquakes, pole shifts, volcanic upheavals, atmospheric and climatic disruption, and intensified worldwide conflict, religious wars, and socio-economic breakdown. The deluge of fire and the time of transition. This is where the Yuga teachings tie directly to Muravyev's time of transition from the esoteric Christian perspective. Muravyev warned that the era ahead has two phases, one of paradise regained and the other of a deluge of fire. What he called the deluge of fire corresponds directly to what Vedic and pre-Vedic traditions described as the fiery end phase of the Kali Yuga, not a purification by water, but by fire. In this sense, Ekpyrosis is the cosmic backdrop of the time of transition. The Taurid comet stream and cycles of purification. According to Misra's research, the destructive phase at the end of the Kali Yuga aligns with real astronomical cycles, especially periods of intensified comet and meteor activity associated with the Taurid stream, the debris field of a massive comet that fragmented in the distant past. Most of the time, Earth passes only through the outer edges in this stream, which appear as ordinary meteor showers. But every few thousand years, Earth appears to move through denser regions of this debris field, creating a window for more severe disruption. Misra points out that these destructive windows align with abrupt climate changes, civilizational collapse, and cataclysmic events in history. They also correspond in duration to the transitional phases between yugas. In other words, the return cycles of the Taurid stream may be one of the physical mechanisms through which these age and purifications unfold. Ancient peoples did not describe these returning celestial forces in modern astronomical language. They experienced comets as divine powers, gods in the sky, and forces that returned at intervals to cleanse or reset the world. There's also scientific evidence that points in this direction. The Younger Dryas event, beginning around 12,800 years ago and lasting roughly 1,200 years, is now associated by many researchers with meteor impacts, likely from cometary fragments. That period brought sudden ecological disruption, the loss of megafauna, major climate instability, and large-scale changes to the Earth's surface. Misra cites the work of comet researchers such as Klube, Napier, Asher, Steele, and Bailey, all of whom have argued for the periodic danger of the Taurid stream and its reoccurring catastrophic potential. According to this view, we may now be entering another major Taurid crossing. Misra notes that the coming decades, especially the period from 2030 to 2040, with particular attention to 2032 and 2036, carry elevated risk as Earth aligns more closely with the denser Taurid stream. This does not mean a specific disaster is certain. The point is not to get lost in doom and gloom predictions or fear. The point is to understand the cosmic pattern, its deeper meaning, and ultimately what is being asked of us. What matters is that these myths, astronomical cycles, and esoteric teachings all point to the same larger truth. The transition between ages is not smooth like the change of seasons. It's purgative and far more disruptive. More importantly, this transition contains a deeper message and opportunity for real change. The good news is that we can actually mitigate potential cataclysms if we answer the call sincerely. Climate change, geoengineering, and cosmic cycles. One of the biggest blind spots of the modern worldview is the belief that the natural disasters we see today, hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires, and abnormal weather patterns, are caused only by human activity. Mainstream culture blames carbon emissions and pollution. Conspiracy culture blames geoengineering, chemtrails, direct energy weapons, and HARP. While there may be partial truths in both views, they are short-sighted because they still place the human being at the center, as if humanity were powerful enough to fully shape and control nature and cosmic cycles. Ironically, the idea that humans control it all is itself a signature illusion of the Kali Yuga. Climate change is real, but not for the reasons most people assume. It goes far beyond man-made factors, whether framed through the carbon narrative or technological manipulation. It is part of a much deeper planetary purification process that intensifies during major cosmic transitions. On a deeper level, human consciousness also affects the Earth's subtle and vibrational field. The instability we see in the outer world mirrors humanity's inner chaos, our disconnection from source, our shadow projections, repression, conditioning, and polarization. The outer climate reflects on some level the inner climate of a humanity profoundly out of alignment with its true nature during this dark phase of the cycle. The transitions between yugas have always involved major shifts in solar activity, geomagnetic fluctuations, earth changes, and intensified encounters with cometary debris fields. These forces can trigger sudden climate swings, cooling or warming cycles, earthquakes, volcanic activity, pole shifts, and long-term environmental instability. This does not dismiss pollution, ecological destruction, or even the reality of geoengineering. But it does mean that far larger forces are at work, forces beyond human control, beyond human technology, and far more ancient and powerful than anything we can manipulate. Over 100 years ago, Gurdjieff gave a stark description of what happens at the end of a civilizational cycle. His words describe our time the same way. He wrote, "There are periods in the life of humanity which generally coincide with the beginning of the fall of cultures and civilizations, when the masses irretrievably lose their reason and begin to destroy everything that has been created by centuries and millenniums of culture. Such periods of mass madness, often coinciding with geological cataclysms, climate changes, and similar phenomena of a planetary character, release a very great quantity of the matter of knowledge. This, in its turn, necessitates the work of collecting this matter of knowledge, which would otherwise be lost. Thus, the work of collecting scattered matter of knowledge frequently coincides with the beginning of the destruction and fall of cultures and civilizations. A dark night of civilization, or the fire of inner purification. This is why Muravyev's warning is so relevant. His time of transition is not merely a poetic metaphor for social change or something that can be reduced to superficial activism, conspiracy exposure, or external action. It describes an actual evolutionary threshold in which humanity is faced with a choice. If humanity refuses the spiritual task, if it continues to cling to ignorance and rebellion against the divine law, then purification comes more forcefully from outside. But if enough people respond to the call, engage in sincere inner work, and undergo the fire inwardly to purify themselves, then the same force becomes transformation rather than destruction. The fire will come either way. The question is whether it acts primarily as outer catastrophe or as inner purification. Like Muravyev, the mother, Mira Alfasa, Sri Aurobindo's spiritual collaborator, was clearly aware of the transition between ages and the potential cataclysms it carries. She also made clear that the course of events is not fixed, that we can mitigate potential catastrophes, and that even a relatively small number of people sincerely engaged in the work can alter what unfolds. She said, quote, "At the moment we are at a decisive turning point in the history of the earth. Once again, from every side I am asked, what is going to happen? Everywhere there is anguish, expectation, fear. What is going to happen? There's only one reply: if man could consent to be spiritualized. And perhaps it would be enough if some individuals became pure gold, for this would be enough to change the course of events. We are faced with this necessity in a very urgent way. This courage, this heroism, which the divine wants of us, why not use it to fight against one's own difficulties, one's own imperfections, one's own obscurities? Why not heroically face the furnace of inner purification, so that it does not become necessary to pass once more through one of those terrible, gigantic destructions which plunge an entire civilization into darkness?" End quote. That is the real point. It is not about waiting for collective awakening or the end of the world. It is not about obsessing over what others are doing or what you think they should be doing, as if you knew their karmic lessons or level of consciousness. It is not about getting hooked on dates, predictions, conspiracies, or fear porn. It's not about falling into pure physical survival fear, stocking up and building bunkers. The real question is, what are you doing with your life? What is your inner orientation? What is your intention in life? Are you aligned with your true self and Dharma? What is your relationship to God and the divine? And ultimately, who are you behind this mask of personality? The deeper message behind all these traditions is the same. When humanity refuses the work of conscious evolution, purification comes from outside. When it accepts the call, the fire turns inward and becomes the furnace of transformation. And that brings us to the deeper meaning of inner and outer purification during this time of transition. The alchemy of inner and outer transformation. The accelerating energies will intensify in the coming times as the alchemical fire expands exponentially, fueled by the friction of seemingly opposing forces working through us and in the world. Anyone who keeps clinging to political, religious, or social systems, sides, and ideologies, to any ism, including anarchism, the dual opposite of statism, and another side of the same coin, to mental moralism and self-righteousness, and remains fixated only on fighting the shadows on the wall of the 3D matrix through mechanical, reactionary activism, trying to fix the system, save the world, or get rid of evil by only externalizing the process or waiting for a savior, whether technological, political, or spiritual, will have a very difficult time. Sooner or later, suffering will force them to let go, face themselves, work on themselves, and surrender to the divine, or they will begin to disintegrate, unable to withstand the Plutonian pressure of the necessary evolutionary process. What is being asked of us is far greater than creating a new system of government or striving only for freedom, sovereignty, and decentralization externally. This transition is about the necessity for a quantum leap in the evolution of consciousness and the need to spiritualize our being. But it is also not about avoiding daily responsibilities. It is not about non-action, denial of evil, or escaping the material world, which is itself a distortion based on corrupted religious ideas, such as the belief that the flesh is sinful, money is evil, and the aim of life is to escape earthly existence. It is about transforming our nature and spiritualizing matter, so that our actions and choices align with our higher being rather than being distorted by ignorance, projections, wounds, and conditioning. By its very nature, this is a process, and it will not happen overnight or within our lifetime. It is about our inner alignment with the divine and a transformation of our mental, egoic, and materialistic consciousness. Otherwise, everything will continue to disintegrate again and again until we get the message. The old needs to die and be transformed before the new can emerge, above all the conditioned and programmed ego, the false personality we identify with and mistake for our true self. Our wounds and traumas accumulated over lifetimes need to be healed and transmuted, and our shadow needs to be integrated rather than projected through this inner alchemical process, the transmutation of lead, matter and ego, into gold, spirit and soul being. This often difficult process of disillusionment ignites the fire within and helps grow the soul. Ego identification is itself a trauma response, the original wound, the fall from Eden, the illusory separation from God. In that sense, everyone is traumatized. The divine Gnostic being. From lead to gold, we aim to be reborn in the true self. In the esoteric Christian tradition, this is the inner alchemical process of the second birth. Ultimately, this path points towards transcending and transforming death itself, so that we may embody what Sri Aurobindo called the divine Gnostic being we are destined to become, no longer half human and half animal, subjected to the lower nature and carnal desire, disease, aging, and death. The divine force is not only meant to transform the individual, but the earth as well. There's no escape into some imaginary heaven out there. Only corrupted dogmatic religion promises paradise in the afterlife through the Matrix religious savior program. However, we cannot skip any steps in this inner transformation and necessary work across lifetimes. As I've said many times before, it is very tempting to engage in spiritual bypassing, get lost in religious dogma or New Age fast food spirituality, fall into the trap of spiritual narcissism and the Luciferic temptation, and overestimate one's level of being, by believing one has already ascended to 5D, been raptured, been saved, or awakened in the true sense of the word. This process also entails a descent into our own being and a confrontation with the darkness and evil within, which we so easily project outward and deny in ourselves. Ultimately, it is about both psychological and spiritual work inwardly and outwardly. Nor will things improve on their own by trying to fix them externally or by desperately searching for a safe place in the world and falling into materialistic survival mode. As many other realized beings have tried to convey for hundreds and even thousands of years, we need to bring forth a true and grounded spirituality within ourselves to seek the kingdom within first. In other words, we must consciously engage in the great work of inner purification and alignment with divine will. Rudolf Steiner expressed this necessity over 100 years ago. He wrote in Cosmic Forces in Man, "Everything depends upon insight into the spirit that is lying hidden in European and American culture, the spirit from which men flee, which for the sake of ease they would fain avoid, but which alone can set the feet of humanity on the path of ascent. People like to put their heads in the sand, saying that things will improve of themselves. No, they will not. The hour of great decision has struck. Either man will resolve to bring forth the spirituality of which I have spoken, or the decline of the West is inevitable. Hopes and fatalistic longings for things to right themselves are of no avail. Once and forever, man has passed into the epoch when he must manipulate his powers out of his own free will. In other words, it is for men themselves to decide for or against spirituality. If the decision is positive, progress will be possible. If not, the doom of the West is sealed, and in the wake of dire catastrophes, the further evolution of humanity will take a course undreamed of today. Those who would strive for true insight into these matters should not, nay, dare not, neglect the study of the life of soul in mankind at large, and in the different peoples, especially of East and West." The Descent of the Supramental Consciousness. Sri Aurobindo, the last avatar who incarnated at the dawn of this time of transition, helped through his integral yoga and divine revelation to establish the conditions on earth for the descent of the supramental consciousness. By supramental consciousness, Sri Aurobindo did not mean a higher or more refined mind or higher intellectual or rational capacities. He called it the supermind, a truth consciousness and divine level of existence beyond the ordinary human mind that acts as an intermediary between the ultimate reality of Sat Chit Ananda, existence, consciousness, bliss, and the manifested created world. It is an omniscient and self-creative power that perceives absolute unity while embracing diversity of life and multiplicity in oneness. Its aim is to evolve humanity into a divine supramental race. This supramental consciousness is now descending upon humanity in the next evolutionary ascending spiral. The task is to become internally receptive and anchor this divine force within, becoming an instrument of the divine Shakti acting out the divine will. The aim is not escape, but transformation. The core difference of Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga is that the aim of life is not escape from the world, but the divine transformation of mind, life, body, and the earth itself. It is not about escaping the body, withdrawing into samadhi, dissolving into nirvana, reaching some otherworldly heaven, or escaping the wheel of samsara as past traditions suggested. It is about fully and integrally embodying the supramental consciousness so that even matter and the physical body may eventually be transformed. In Sri Aurobindo's vision, the end goal is not liberation away from earthly existence, but the manifestation of the divine here in life, leaving nothing untouched, cutting nothing off, but transforming everything. This would culminate in what he called the divine Gnostic being, a fully embodied being no longer subject in the same way to ignorance, division, suffering, aging, birth, and death, as the transmutation of consciousness and matter reaches its fulfillment on a transformed earth. This is not just about your individual liberation, but the liberation of all of humanity and the earth in the far distant future. This is a radically different spiritual vision from the old ascetic or world-denying paths. It is not rejection of life, but its divinization, as the mother put it. The old spirituality was an escape from life into the divine reality, leaving the world just where it was, as it was, whereas our new vision, on the contrary, is a divinization of life, a transformation of the material world into a divine world. It is not the old one transforming itself, it is a new world that is born, and we are right in the midst of this period of transition where the two are entangled. In the supramental creation, there will be no longer any religions. The whole life will be the expression, the flowering into forms of the divine unity manifesting into the world. When the physical substance is supramentalized, to incarnate on earth will no longer be a cause of inferiority, quite the contrary. It will give a plenitude which cannot be obtained otherwise. But all this is in the future. It is a future which has begun, but which will take some time to be realized integrally. Meanwhile, we are in a very special situation, extremely special, without precedent. Man as a transitional being. Like the esoteric Christian tradition, Sri Aurobindo also emphasized that we are in a transitional period, stating, "Man is a transitional being. He is not final. The step from man to Superman is the next approaching achievement in the Earth's evolution. It is inevitable because it is at once the intention of the inner spirit and the logic of nature's process." This Superman Sri Aurobindo refers to, not to be confused with Nietzsche's Übermensch, is the divine Gnostic being, the destined future of humanity's evolution. It relates to what Muraviev called the spiritualized new man in the era of the Holy Spirit. We are still far from this ideal and from the completion of the evolutionary process, and must pass through several stages before the supramental consciousness can be fully embodied and transform life, mind, body, matter, and earth. According to Sri Aurobindo, we are currently in the age of mental man, deeply entrenched in materialism, a necessary stage before the supramental age. In other words, this corresponds to the dark age of the Kali Yuga, a necessary descent into matter and darkness that must be faced before the ascent and eventual supramentalization. However, nothing substantial will change unless humanity consents to be spiritualized, and merely mental, moral, or external revolutions are not enough. As Sri Aurobindo wrote in Thoughts and Glimpses, all would change if man could once consent to be spiritualized, but his nature, mental and vital and physical, is rebellious to the higher law. He loves his imperfections. The spirit is the truth of our being. Mind and life embodied in their imperfections are its masks. But in their perfection should be its molds. To be spiritual only is not enough. That prepares a number of souls for heaven, but leaves the earth very much where it was. Neither is a compromise the way of salvation. The world knows three kinds of revolution. The material has strong results. The moral and intellectual are infinitely larger in their scope and richer in their fruits. But the spiritual are the great sowings. If the triple change could coincide in a perfect correspondence, a faultless work would be done. But the mind and body of mankind cannot hold perfectly a strong spiritual inrush. Most is split, much of the rest is corrupted. Many intellectual and physical upturnings of our soil are needed to work out a little result from a large spiritual sowing. The change we see in the world today are intellectual, moral, physical in their ideal and intention. The spiritual revolution waits for its hour and throws up meanwhile its waves here and there. Until it comes, the sense of the others cannot be understood. Until then, all interpretation of present happening and forecast of man's future are vain things. For its nature, power, event are that which will determine the next cycle of humanity. Beyond mind and the higher call. Our ordinary mind, which we are so proud of and believe to be the pinnacle of human evolution with its intellectual and rational capabilities, is also an instrument of ignorance, contributing to the darkness, suffering, and evil working through humanity. The mind can never perceive gnosis, higher knowledge, or the divine. At the same time, as Sri Aurobindo noted, a smaller spiritual elite has always worked tirelessly toward this great aim, at times exercising a powerful influence in civilizations such as Vedic India, ancient Egypt, and Atlantis. Now, more and more people whose souls are ripe for the great work are answering this higher call. As Sri Aurobindo wrote in Letters on Yoga, the mass of humanity evolves slowly, containing in itself all stages of the evolution from the material and the vital man to the mental man. A small minority has pushed beyond the barriers, opening the doors to occult and spiritual knowledge and preparing the ascent of the evolution beyond mental man into spiritual and supramental being. Sometimes this minority has exercised an enormous influence, as in Vedic India, Egypt, or, according to tradition, in Atlantis, and determined the civilization of the race, giving it a strong stamp of the spiritual or the occult. Sometimes they have stood apart in their secret schools or orders, not directly influencing a civilization which was sunk in material ignorance or in chaos and darkness, or in the hard external enlightenment which rejects spiritual knowledge. The cycles of evolution tend always upward, but they are cycles and do not ascend in a straight line. The process, therefore, gives the impression of a series of ascents and descents, but what is essential in the gains of the evolution is kept, or, if eclipsed for a time, re-emerges in new forms suitable to the new ages." End quote. The dark forces are currently far better organized and more unified in their agenda than the forces of light in humanity. Too many people are still driven primarily by conditioned desires, shadow projections, fear, and lower nature impulses. Any action arising from that foundation will eventually be usurped by hostile forces unless it is rooted in sincere aspiration and surrender to the divine. The pressure of the descending force. The planet is being infused with ever more dynamic supramental energies of the divine force as the dark and light polarities increase, creating more friction for those caught in the current. The light brings up everything that is not in alignment with who you truly are or who you think you are. All your triggers and projections ignite until you own their source within yourself, stop externalizing and justifying your inner pain, step out of victimhood, blame, and grandiosity, integrate the shadow, and cut off the food source for anti-divine hostile forces that play humans like puppets and feed off projected emotional luge. Hence, it is essential to engage in the great work on all levels, physically, psychologically, intellectually, and spiritually, in order to clear the vessel, purify your being, and bring forth essence, the soul or psychic being, as a transducer for divine will. This work is imperative if one is to hold the frequency of the descending supramental divine force during this transition. The split within humanity. However, not everyone in the current incarnation and evolutionary state is able to engage in this work deeply enough to embody and anchor these frequencies. Hence, the necessity of the splitting of humanity, which Sri Aurobindo and the Mother also foresaw. Muraviev speaks of this splitting during this time of transition through the lens of esoteric Christianity, pointing to the difference between Adamic man and pre-Adamic man, which also relates to the topic of organic portals or soulless humans, which I've written an article about and we also had a podcast episode about. It is important to understand that this splitting is a natural process in the evolution of consciousness before all of humanity can be spiritualized in some more distant stage. Many people have abused and misinterpreted knowledge about different levels of being and soul potential to demonize others, falling into superiority while overestimating their own level of being. This means we can no longer spiritually bypass our inner work and shadow, nor can we bypass looking clearly at the darkness in the world and what must be resisted. Both inner and outer work are required. Sri Aurobindo was very clear that the supramental consciousness would not descend equally or uniformly into all humanity at once. It would manifest through a few first, those inwardly prepared and able to receive it, and only then gradually spread into the earth consciousness. In that sense, the split is part of a larger evolutionary process. Spiritual warfare and the battle for the human being. One of the greatest battles of this time of transition is the human being itself. The most important part to understand is that the war is essentially through us, for there are forces in non-physical realms that have been manipulating humans increasingly throughout the descent over thousands of years, and we have now reached the endgame. Transhumanism, artificial intelligence, and the growing push towards total technological mediation of life are expressions of a deeper anti-divine impulse that seeks to sever the human being even further from soul embodiment, nature, and the divine. Technology itself is not the problem. The problem is the spirit and intention behind how it is being developed and used and the deeper agenda driving it. The more people are pushed out of their bodies and into artificial, disembodied and virtualized states of existence, the more vulnerable they become to manipulation and occult interference. Transhumanism is not just a social or political issue, it is a spiritual issue. It affects the future of the soul in relation to the body, the earth, and the evolutionary possibility of becoming a spiritualized being. The religion of transhumanism is the endgame card of the hostile forces, an attempt to interfere with the process of spiritualization and entrap as many souls as possible. We can see this distortion and temptation in many forms already: the obsession with technological control, the fixation on artificial enhancement, the commodification of the body, and the fear of aging and death. The more human beings identify with the body as their true self, with image over essence, and with physical appearance over inner being, the more easily they can be seduced by the promise of artificial immortality, synthetic pleasure and beauty, or machine-based transcendence. At its extreme, this is the birth of what might be called silicon-based man in opposition to the true spiritual evolution of the human being. It is an attempt to counterfeit transcendence through technology rather than through the difficult inner work of purification, soul embodiment, in union with the divine. We are being lured with the counterfeit of what we are actually yearning for, which is the divine and the true immortal soul being within us to come forward. Yet, this dark agenda, however real, is not the final word. It does not mean it will succeed in the way its matrix architects and the anti-divine forces intend. There's light at the end of the tunnel, especially for those already engaged in the great work. Soul integration and embodiment are imperative in this day and age. They are part of the antidote to the soul harvesting agenda. It is up to each one of us to prepare the vessel through sincere inner work, to anchor the light, to surrender to the divine, and to spiritualize our being. This is difficult work for human beings who love the ignorance and imperfections, who remain addicted to their lower nature, image, and desires. Many are not yet ripe for this work in the present cycle. Others refuse to call and instead indulge their projections, blame, virtue signaling, entitlement, and victim consciousness, all of which serve as food for the anti-divine hostile forces. Sri Aurobindo was very clear when he said that the work is a battle and it requires a spiritual warrior attitude, as he wrote in The Synthesis of Yoga. Accepting life, the spiritual warrior has to bear not only his own burden, but a great part of the world's burden too, along with it as a continuation of his own sufficiently heavy load. Therefore, his work has much more of the nature of a battle than others. But this is not only an individual battle. It is a collective war waged over a considerable country. He has not only to conquer in himself the forces of egoistic falsehood and disorder, but to conquer them as representatives of the same adverse and inexhaustible forces in the world. Their representative character gives them a much more obstinate capacity of resistance and almost endless right to reoccurrence. Often he finds that even after he has won persistently his own personal battle, he has still to win it over and over again in a seemingly interminable war, because his inner existence has already been so much enlarged that not only it contains his own being with its well-defined needs and experiences, but is in solidarity with the being of others, because in himself he contains the universe. The birth canal of a new humanity. We are in a birth canal during this time of transition. We are emerging out of the long night of the Kali Yuga and standing at the fiery threshold of Ekpyrosis, the purification transition between world cycles. This is not merely the collapse of an old age, but the painful and necessary labor of a new one being born. The old cannot survive intact because it is no longer aligned with the evolutionary pressure of the supramental consciousness now acting upon humanity and the earth. Whenever I speak of this, some people assume I am promoting passivity, escapism, or spiritual bypassing. But that reaction usually comes from those who have not sincerely faced themselves, or who have only intellectualized the work. This work is anything but passive. It confronts you with life and with yourself in the most demanding way. It forces you to stop blaming, projecting, and looking for outer enemies to explain everything. It compels you to take responsibility for your inner state, your life, your choices, and your alignment with truth. Most people remain trapped in victim and blame consciousness, always needing a villain to point to, whether politicians, elites, governments, technocrats, the cabal, liberals, conservatives, communists, Zionists, or some other outer force. Most of us never grasp what evil actually is in the context of the evolution of consciousness, or what it means to face the dark half of the truth. A teaching function that also requires facing the darkness within oneself. That is where the real solution begins. This does not mean that there is no place for practical preparation or wise action in the world. But bunkers, wealth, physical strategies, and self-preservation plans rooted in fear and materialistic consciousness are not the solution. As Misra wrote in Yuga Shift, you cannot buy your way to the next Yuga in the ascending cycle, no matter how much wealth you have or what a big shot you are, or how many underground shelters you have built. You will not be able to make it to the next Yuga unless you transform yourself and align with Dharma. Don't waste time building shelters. Work on your consciousness. The message is the same across esoteric traditions. The outer purification of Ekpyrosis is not God's punishment, nor a reason for doom and gloom. It is a necessary phase in the evolution of consciousness. The more we resist it, the more destructive it becomes outwardly. The more we consciously participate in it inwardly, the more it becomes a force of transformation that helps humanity and the world. This is why I state it again. The most important thing you can do for yourself, your family, your community, and the world is to live in accordance with your Dharma, engage in conscious inner work, and willingly burn in the fire of transmutation. As Adyashanti said, this authentic impulse can be a bit frightening because when you feel it, you know it is real. When you have let go of all conditions, when you have let go of how you want your own awakening to be and what you want the journey to be like, you have let go of your illusion of control. How does one know if they are ready? One is ready when they are willingly to be absolutely consumed, when they are willing to be fuel for a fire without end. This is not the time to escape the world any further. It is the time to embrace life more deeply by anchoring the divine force within us. The great adventure of this cosmic yoga towards our divinity continues as we enter the birth canal of a new human possibility. We still have a long way to go, but it is right here, and you have a choice to make. As the mother, Mira Alfasa, said, the choice is imperative, truth or the abyss.